The Central Air Force Museum at Menino is the largest aviation museum in Russia and a must-see for all aviation enthusiasts. Located 38 kilometers from Moscow, it houses the greatest collection of air-related items. The exhibits are located in the open air, in 3 hangars and 3 exhibition halls. The whole exhibition complex covers over 20 hectares. The museum was opened in 1960 at the original airfield location. Today, the former airfield structures serve as the museum facilities. The origins of the museum go back to 1940 when the village of Menino was selected to be the location of what is now the Gagarin Air Force Academy. The museum itself was founded in 1958, 2 years after the airfield was closed, and had 6 aircraft and 20 aircraft guns at the time. When it opened to the public another 2 years later in 1960, it had 14 aircraft. By early 1970, the museum's collection had expanded to about 40 aircraft. In 1990, the aircraft on display were rearranged according to design bureau and chronological order. The museum's main hall was mostly destroyed by fire in 2005. By 2013, a new hangar had been built to house the World War II aircraft. In 2016, it was reported that the museum was to close, with the exhibits being transferred to Patriot Park. New halls with the modern equipment for exhibitions were built. However, a new exhibition hall was opened in February 2020. Apart from war machines, cargo, sport, and civilian planes and helicopters, the museum features collections of missiles, bombs, fuses and ammunition, navigation instruments, pieces of radio and communication equipment, personal things of pilots, etc. Many of the aircraft were produced in limited numbers and can only be found in the Menino Aviation Museum. Besides, the museum houses the most complete collection of Soviet and Russian aviation history. The museum is currently open to members of the public to visit. The Russian Air Force is a branch of the Russian Aerospace Forces, the latter being formed on August 1, 2015 with the merging of the Russian Air Force and the Russian Aerospace Defense Forces. The modern VVS was originally established on May 7, 1992 following Boris Yeltsin's creation of the Ministry of Defense. However, the Russian Federation's Air Force can trace its lineage and traditions back to the Imperial Russian Air Service, 1912 to 1917, and the Soviet Air Forces, 1918 to 1991. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union into its 15 constituent republics in December 1991, the aircraft and personnel of the Soviet Air Forces, the VVS, were divided among the newly independent states. General Pyotr Daimkin, the former deputy commander-in-chief of the Soviet Air Forces, became the first commander of the new organization on August 24, 1991. Russia received the majority of the most modern fighters and 65% of the manpower. The major commands of the former Soviet VVS, the long-range aviation, military transport aviation and frontal aviation, were renamed, with few changes, Russian VVS commands. However, many regiments, aircraft, and personnel were claimed by the republics they were based in, forming the core of the new republic's air forces. Some aircraft in Belarus and Ukraine, such as Tupolev Tu-160s, were returned to Russia, sometimes in return for debt reductions, as well as the 79th Heavy Bomber Aviation Division at Chagan in Kazakhstan. During the 1990s, the financial stringency was felt throughout the armed forces made its mark on the VVS as well. Pilots and other personnel could sometimes not get their wages for months, and on occasion resorted to desperate measures. For MiG, 31 pilots at Yelazovo in the Far East went on hunger strike in 1996 to demand back pay, which was several months overdue, and the problem was only resolved by diverting unit money intended for other tasks. As a result of the cutbacks, infrastructure became degraded as well, and in 1998, 40% of military airfields needed repair. The VVS participated in the First Chechen War, 1994 to 1996, and the Second Chechen War, 1999 to 2002. These campaigns also presented significant difficulties for the VVS, including the terrain, lack of significant fixed targets, and insurgents armed with Stinger and Strela 2M surface-to-air missiles. The former Soviet Air Defense Forces remained independent for several years under Russian control, only merging with the Air Forces in 1998. The decree merging the two forces was issued by President Boris Yeltsin on July 16, 1997. During 1998, altogether 580 units and formations were disbanded, 134 reorganized, and over 600 given a new jurisdiction. 8. The redistribution of forces affected 95% of aircraft, 98% of helicopters, 93% of anti-aircraft missile complexes, 95% of the equipment of radiotechnical troops, 100% of anti-aircraft missiles, and over 60% of aviation armament. More than 600,000 tons of material changed location and 3,500 aircraft changed airfields. Military transport aviation planes took more than 40,000 families to new residence areas. The short-lived operational commands were abolished. Two air armies, the 37th Air Army and the 61st Air Army, were established directly under the Supreme Command. The former frontal aviation and anti-aircraft forces were organized as Air Force armies and anti-aircraft defense armies under the military district commanders. There were initially for such armies with headquarters in St. Petersburg, Rostov-on-Don, Khabarovsk, and Chita. Two military districts had separate air and air defense corps. When the Transbaikal Military District and Siberian Military District were merged, the 14th Air and Air Defense Forces Army was formed to serve as the Air Force formation in the area. The number of servicemen in the Air Force was reduced to about 185,000 from the former combined number of 318,000. 123,500 positions were abolished, including almost 1,000 colonel positions. The resignation of 3,000 other servicemen included 46 generals, of which 15 were colonel generals. On December 29, 1998, Colonel General Anatoly Kornikov, a former Air Defense Forces officer and new commander-in-chief of the merged force, succeeding Dankin, reported to the Russian defense minister that the task had, in principle, been achieved. General Kornikov established the new headquarters of the force in Zaria, near Balashika, 20 kilometers east of the center of Moscow, in the former PVO Central Command Post, where the CIS Common Air Defense System is directed from. In December 2003, the aviation assets of the Russian ground forces, mostly helicopters, were transferred to the VVS, following the shooting down of a Mi-26 helicopter in Chechnya on August 19, 2002 that claimed 19 lives. The former Army aviation was in its previous form intended for the direct support of the ground forces by providing their tactical air support, conducting tactical aerial reconnaissance, transporting airborne troops, providing fire support of their actions, electronic warfare, setting of minefield barriers, other tasks. The former Army aviation was subsequently managed by the Chief of the Department of Army Aviation. In 2010, it was announced that the 2003 decision to transfer ground force aviation to the Air Force was reversed. with the transfer back to the ground forces to occur sometime in 2015 or 2016. During the 2000s, the Air Forces continued to suffer from a lack of resources for pilot training. In the 1990s, Russian pilots achieved approximately 10% of the flight hours of the United States Air Force. The 2007 edition of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS, Military Balance listed pilots of tactical aviation flying 20 to 25 hours a year, 61st Air Army pilots, former military transform aviation, 60 hours a year, and Army aviation under VBS control 55 hours a year. Modernization plans and programs carried out since the 2010s are being continued into 2021 as a part of Russia's state armament program for 2018 to 2027. On February 24, 2022, the VBS was deployed in support of the invasion of Ukraine. The VBS have reportedly deployed about 300 combat aircraft within range of Ukraine. Aircraft have also been deployed in Belarus for sorties over Ukraine.